Hi, welcome to MBAX 9152 Digital Strategy. This is the week 3 introduction, and the title of this week is called Digitally Enabled Disruption. My name is David Goad. I'm your course coordinator for Digital Strategy course, and I'll be going through this presentation with you. So my agenda for today is similar to my agenda for previous weeks. I'm going to talk about the content around the key concepts and go through that. Which in this case will include information goods, the evolving role of IT and IS, digital business models, digital disruption. Then I'm going to review your to-dos for the upcoming week 3 and make sure you have a clear view of what all you need to do in terms of the course and everything you need to complete. So information goods, what is an information good? Well, they talk about in the readings this concept of rivalrous versus non-rivalrous goods. So rivalrous goods are those goods that can only be possessed by one person at a time. They are a physical asset. They can only have ownership of one person. They can only be used by one person or one organization at a time. Non-rivalrous goods can actually be used by everyone at the same time. There's no limiting. It's difficult to limit access to them. And so by these definitions, information is what they refer to as a non-rivalrous good. Which then illustrates the need for, they talked at length in the readings about the need to copyright or control goods, because otherwise how can you assess value to a good if you can't control it? There were some other characteristics of information goods that they talked about in the readings. These included the idea of renewability. Information can never be used. It can only be used again and again. Universality. Everyone can use the same information at the same time if they want. Magnetism, the idea that the more information you have together, talking about Metcalfe's law, then the more value it generates. Lack of friction. The more easily information flows, the more quickly its value increases. The more it goes from one place to place and you can use that information, the more valuable it can become. However, it can also be vulnerable in the sense that it can be destroyed through misuse or misrepresentation. So these are the characteristics of information goods they talked about in the reading. The main gist of the readings with regards to information goods was this idea that information products have different cost structures than physical products. And in the books and in the readings, they talk about these different types of transaction costs, which were search costs to actually search for the actual product or service, information costs in terms of gathering information, bargaining costs in terms of negotiation for the product or service, costs in decision making, costs in policing, and costs in enforcement. And this whole idea that technology through digital disruption drives down these transaction costs, and in so doing enables new business models and creates. In the text readings, they talk about the evolving role of IT versus IS, and it's a definition that you need to make sure that you understand. Information technology refers to the hardware, the software, and the infrastructure that supports information services. Information systems, or IS, is the social technical processes and systems. So in other words, you might sit there and say that information technology might be the underlying Oracle database or the Oracle ERP system. Information systems takes the view that it's not just the ERP system, but the people putting the data in, the business processes, everything that goes into creating an information system, which of course is supported by information technology, but it doesn't necessarily need to be high tech. For example, a piece of paper and people writing on a piece of paper could be considered to be part of an information system. Okay, so one information system is the holistic view around how information gets managed in an organization, all the tools, all the processes, all the people involved, right? Whereas information technology is strictly the technology that underpins information systems. One of the key, I've said this before in this course and in my other courses, and I'll say it again, one of the key things that we'll talk through, and I'll have a specialist slide about this a little bit later on in my presentation tonight, that new technologies enable new business models, and that's what creates the value, right? So new technologies in and of themselves are not useful, but it's the new business values or the new business models with the reduction in transaction costs associated with them and create value for an organization. What that means is if you haven't figured out how to build the correct business model to enable a technology, then you're not going to get the value out of it. An example of that is look at Google, for example. The search engine was really, really great, but it didn't create value until someone came along and realized that to commercialize it, they needed to do AdWords. There's a lot of different characteristics that they talk about in readings with regards to digital disruption. This idea that you're going from physical marketplaces to market spaces, typically two-sided marketplaces, which have this concept of what they refer to as network effects. The more people use the solution, the more value it creates. But just understand that there's different types of network effects. There's direct network effects or direct benefits. There's indirect network effects, which include things like, if you buy a Blu-ray player, the benefits it generates if you buy that player on people buying Blu-ray, DVDs, for example. And then there's also, so there could be direct network effects, indirect network effects, and there can also be positive and negative. So the more people use a platform like Facebook, the more value it has for people. But an example of a negative network effect would be the more people who use cars, the more congested, the more negative it is. So there's this concept of market spaces and the network effects that are associated with them. This idea of the blurring of the physical and digital divide, I'll talk about this later on, but this whole concept of the Internet of Things, everyday devices that are connected to the Internet, providing useful information about us and the world around us. A move from a push to a pull economy, the idea that we have so much good quality information about people that we can provide very personalized products and services that, based when people need them, as opposed to pushing them on and advertising them. We can actually tailor our service offerings for what people need when they need it. And this whole idea of developing open standards, the whole internet is based on a series of open standards that people use in terms of communication at various levels of infrastructure. And it's those development of those standards that have been around for roughly about 20 years, everything from TCP to various other standards that have enabled the internet to work. And it's these open standards that are absolutely critical in that sort of trade and e-commerce. One of the things they mentioned, which is pretty critical in terms of your understanding of online commerce or new digital commerce, is this concept of the long tail. Most physical goods are manufactured goods, right? There's this whole view that they're trying to drive down the marginal cost of the good by producing large volumes of the product. Spreading the fixed costs over a large number of the units means that the overall cost per unit of the product drops, which generally means that it's more profitable to sell large volumes of products than it is to sell small niche volumes of products. If you sell smaller volumes of products, then you typically sell for a higher price to make enough profit. That's the physical world. In the digital world, where there is actually essentially no marginal cost associated with an additional product, for example, going on to Spotify listing an additional song for you to download, there's absolutely almost no marginal cost to them, maybe a bit of storage, but really there's no marginal cost for them to list more songs. What that means is that online retailers or people who are selling information goods or technology or e-commerce, it means that they have this long tail where you can sell products that have fewer and fewer buyers, where you have smaller and smaller amounts and still make money off of that because these marginal costs have driven down. Examples of that are if you go onto Spotify and they list all these different songs, which are very, very, niche songs that people probably wouldn't listen to very often, but they can list them because they'll still make money off them and that content. The same with Amazon listing different books. The same with online retailers selling products that are, you wouldn't frequently buy it. They still make money off it because they've driven the transaction costs down so low, or the marginal costs so low, that it's profitable to sell very, very small volumes of very, very niche products. So that's a key concept to understand in terms of online commerce, this idea of the long tail. This idea, the other key issue to understand about digital commerce or online commerce is this idea of increased personalization, the idea that you have so much information about the individual that you can provide them with very tailored products and services. And as I said to earlier, this whole concept of the Internet of Things, that's a whole research area in and of itself. It's one of the things I research and I talk on is IoT and artificial intelligence. Those are my two core research areas. If you want to get a more of a deep dive in terms of the whole IoT space, then I'd suggest you attend my digital innovation course, which I'm running this semester and I'll run next semester as well. I did also post some videos up for you guys as well on with the different technologies. One of them was on the Internet of Things, so you can go have a watch of that to get a little bit of background around what IoT is as well. Other things they talked about in the readings, this idea of the three errors of IT and IS. The first error being data processing, basically eliminating information break costs or transaction costs by putting everything into the same system, so having all data in one system, which facilitated data management. Then they talked about the evolution of these data systems into management information systems, basically tools to enable managers to manage processes more effectively, everything from sales processes to manufacturing processes to inventory control processes. These days, they talk about the idea that IS or IT now becomes strategic. It actually creates value for an organization, and it's the technology that's the value point. It's not just supporting an organization or supporting the generation of physical goods or building something or building physical products. The actual technology itself is what creates your competitive advantage. Some of the strategic uses of information technology or information systems. Well, the first one is just basically interconnectivity, connecting everyone together, customers, business partners, suppliers through the internet and the Internet of Things. Improved integration of internal processes, again, reducing the need to double key, double entry, manual entry in information. And the better integration you have, the less double keying you have of information, the more efficient you are, and more quickly you can respond to various requirements. And then there's also this idea of information-based products or services, which people are selling more and more. More often than not, if a company offers you a free product, it's usually because they're using you, as they say, or the data about you as a product. So there's this old adage: if the product is free, then you are the product, as they say. And the book also talks about this idea of a portfolio management perspective of IS or IT investments. Very similar to the concept of a stock portfolio. You have a number of different, in a stock portfolio, you have a number of different stocks that have value, but also have a cost. There's the propensity for them to go up in value. You have to weigh off that sort of increase in value versus the increase in costs. In the case of a IS or IT investment portfolio, you have a number of different projects which will generate benefit for the business. They all have individual costs, so you're basically weighing each project from a benefits versus cost perspective up against all the other projects that it's competing with. And then there's this whole idea of strategic alignment. I talked about this in previous weeks. People used to say that the business strategy drove the IT strategy. Now what I would say to you, or that drove the digital strategy, now what I would say to you is they're built together. One influences the other. So it's a two-way arrow. The digital strategy influences the business strategy. The business strategy will influence the digital strategy as well. They talk about in the book and the various readings this idea of the business model. I thought it important to define for you guys what a business model is. A business strategy is, if you think about the strategy, is the what, and the business model is the how. So I might say that the strategy is I'm going to be selling children's clothes. That's the strategy, and the how might be that I might sell it as an online marketplace, right? So typically at a high level, business models, how business strategies work. But if you drill down a little bit more in detail, people talk about the business model being the money-making logic of the business, or an architecture of how we deliver value and to whom. It sits between the organization and its strategy. So as I said, the business model enables the business strategy. And it does change over time and requires innovation. One of these concepts that we talk about in terms of disruption is the idea that disruptive innovation creates new business models, right? And it's the new business models that create value. So business models are always undergoing change, and that's important to understand. There's a couple of concepts they talk about in the readings. This idea of the digital business model. There is the digital version. I prefer the sort of more classical business model, which I'll talk about in a minute, which I'm sure some of you guys have heard of. So in the digital business model, I talk about it having three parts: basically the content, the experience, and the platform. So the content is what is consumed, which could include an information or a product. The experience is how it's packaged, or roughly the customer experience, including the processes, the systems. And then the platform is how it's delivered, which could include internal things like other business processes or systems, or external, like, for example, hardware, public networks, partners, and these kinds of things. So the idea is that if you can describe these three things and all the key components, you've described the business model for a digital business. Very similarly, I'm sure a number of you have already heard of the concept of the business model canvas, which is another methodology for describing a business model. This one is more generic across all businesses, not specifically digital businesses. It was developed by a gentleman called Osterwalder in 2008. It's extremely popular now. You can go up to a website called Strategizer and download for free a lot of documentation around how to use the business model canvas to construct your business. And what Osterwalder said was that if you could name these sort of 9 key characteristics of a business model, then you'd fully describe the business model for an organization. In his case, he talked about key activities, the value proposition, how you're going to manage customer relationships, who were your actual customers, how you would generate revenue, what your costs were, what the key resources that you're going to need, who are you going to be your key partners in terms of delivering your product or service, and what were your channels to market. So just another different way of understanding business models. A more generic one, as I said, there was the digital business model that we talked about in the readings, and then there's just kind of business model canvas, which is more a generic concept around business models. Again, the business model being the how you go about doing your business to achieve your strategy, which is the I talked about this a little bit earlier in one of the other slides. I'll go through this again. This whole idea that there is a strong relationship between technology, business models, and values. Right? So Osterwalder, as I said, described the business model as a blueprint of how a company does business. He talked about these 9 components of the business model canvas. Digital business model, we talked about the 3 different components of that. Just another methodology. It has been demonstrated that new technologies facilitate the development of new business models, so there's good research on this. An example of new technology developing new business models is a steam engine, right? When the steam engine was developed, people went from an agrarian society to more of a city-based society with mass production. Other examples of new technology leading to new business models would be, for example, the electric light. Osterwalder did say when he did his thesis and his subsequent papers, he did go through about how new technologies enable new business models. He talked again about this idea of transaction costs, but he also talked about enabling new products and services and making it possible to reach new markets and products with these new business models. It has also been shown that the business model can have a significant impact on a business's valuation. For example, when Snapchat IPO'd for $29 billion US, and when they IPO'd and they pretty much had very little revenue and almost no profit, a lot of people argued the reason why they were worth that much was because of their innovative business model and their access to so many people in terms of how they connected people up. So it's reasonable to conclude that new technologies generate new business models which create significant value for the business. So this is a key relationship that you need to understand, this relationship between technologies and business models. So they talked about, and obviously the section this week is about digital disruption. So we talked about disruptive innovation. Some of the things they talked about in the readings was this idea that disruption is actually a process. It is ongoing. It is incremental. It never stops. Organizations are disrupting themselves and disrupting others, right? Again, coming back to this idea of the business model, most disruptors with their new technologies create new business models which are very different from those of the incumbents. We're talking this week very heavily about the idea of Uber. Are they disruptive? Are they not? Right? There are differences in business models, right? They clearly have a different business model, so we talk about that. It's important to understand that some disruptive innovations succeed and some don't. Just like 4 out of 5 new startups fail, many disruptive innovations never succeed because people don't find the right business model to take correct advantage of them, or they're not properly funded, or there are other reasons that they don't succeed. This mantra of disrupt versus disrupted can be misguiding. There is no doubt that as an incumbent you have to develop strategies to address disruption. That's one of the things I cover off in my digital innovation course, is how do you manage disruptive innovators when they come into your organization or they come into your market. So there's a number of different conversations that you talk about that. But it is true that organizations or incumbents need to have strategies to address new disruptive innovations coming along. They either need to disrupt the innovation or come up with other strategies to be able to address those new disruptions that are coming into their markets, because they'll happen all the time. All right, so that was a review of the content for this week. So what are your to-dos for this week? Well, fairly similar to last week in the sense that you have to complete the core readings. I know a few people said there was close to 60 pages, but it was all fairly interesting readings, so hopefully you enjoyed it. The discussion topic. So because the discussion topic this week was again on Uber and the taxi industry, what I'm suggesting to you, and I sent you guys a note out separately about this, is if you want to do a bit of a pivot on the topic and talk about Uber Eats and its disruption of the food and delivery industry, then make it a little bit more interesting for your folks, rather than talking about Uber 2 weeks in a row, or just Uber in the taxi industry 2 weeks in a row. So maybe this week talk about Uber Eats and how they're disrupting the food delivery industry, particularly in Australia, because they just came into the Australian market over the last few months, and they're certainly taking market share very quickly. You also need to write your next blog post. So what you were supposed to do here is, from the perspective of an incumbent, write a post on what is the incumbent's digital threat landscape. So there's a methodology in terms of identifying digital threats, and you need to have a think about that and write it from the perspective. Pick one company and talk about how you would manage their digital threats. And then the other thing is, and the last thing is, you should start thinking about how you're going to, you formed all your groups for your group project. You guys should be starting to discuss now what the topic would be. And basically the topic is to pick a company. So you need to go out, identify a few companies in your group that you think would be likely candidates for you to do your report on, and then you need to go and do some research first. So I would suggest you come up with a short list. Maybe each person in the group takes a company from the short list, goes out and researches that company, and then you get back together and kind of compare notes and decide whether you have enough information. Because once you've picked a company for your group project, you need to let me know about that, send me an email, and you need to justify to me that you have enough information about that company to effectively do your report and to build a strategy recommendation for them. Anyways, that's your to-dos for this week. Hopefully you have a good week, and I'll talk to you guys next week on my introductory video next week. But have a good week and enjoy all those activities. Thanks. Bye.